Welcome, everybody, like I said, to our Waterfront webinar today, Shaping Our Waterfront Future, the launch of the 2026 Waterfront Alliance Policy Platform. My name is Aria Cochran. I'm the Director of Communications here at Waterfront Alliance, and I'm excited to welcome you all to our April webinar. I'll turn it over to Julie now.
Thank you, Aria, and thank you everyone for joining. I'm Julie Raskin, President and CEO of Waterfront Alliance. And for those of you that don't know us, we are a US-based nonprofit organization with a growing alliance of more than 1,100 partners that focuses on environmental and economic development and bringing about real change to the shorelines, waterfronts, and coastlines in the New York, New Jersey harbor region and actually across the nation. Today's webinar is titled Shaping Our Waterfronts Future, Launch of the 2026 Waterfront Alliance Policy Platform. We're very excited to present our key policy priorities for 2026. Our policy team will show details about the priorities, their impacts on the region, and what we aim to achieve around these priorities this year. Now it is my honor to introduce you to our panelists. First, Tyler Taba serves as our Director of Policy and Government Affairs, leading waterfront policy strategy and government relations at Waterfront Alliance. His background spans climate adaptation for national parks with the National Parks Conservation Association, floodplain management with FEMA, and stormwater management at New York City parks. He was named to Crain's New York Business 20 in their 20s for his leadership on flood risk disclosure laws, and recently served on Mayor Zoran Mamdani's Transportation, Climate, and Infrastructure Transition Committee. Welcome, Tyler. And Maité Duquela is a Climate Policy Fellow at Waterfront Alliance, supporting the Rise to Resilience Coalition through policy research, partner engagement, and communications. She previously worked with the Environmental Defense Fund and Eastern Research Group on climate resilience initiatives. Maité brings expertise in environmental research, data analysis, project management, and strategic communications to our conversation today. I'll now pass it to Tyler and Maité to provide a brief introduction of our policy platform.
Awesome. Thank you, Julie, and thanks for the intro. That 20 in their 20s, I have two more days of that. I'm turning 30 on March 27th, so holding on to that one for dear life. Okay, so with that, we can go through the next slides here. So this is just the mission of the Waterfront Alliance. Together, we lead the way for a thriving and resilient waterfront, shorelines, and coastlines. Julie covered that. We can move into the next slide, who we are, and you know, many of you know us and have worked with us across many of our different program areas, whether it's our advocacy, our waterfront access, our ferries and maritime and working waterfronts work, Wedge. You've been to our events, our waterfront conference, which is coming up, City of Water Day, which is also coming up. So we'll get to all of this, and we can go through to the next slides. David, yeah, this is just our alliance partnership. To Julie's point, we are an alliance of over 1,100 partners. And if you go through to the next slide, some of our programs that we talked about: Maritime and Access, Estuary Explorers, our youth STEM education program, Wedge, our infrastructure and design standard, and Rise to Resilience, which Julie talked about, our Coalition for Resilience and Advocacy. Okay, great. So I think we have a poll before we jump into our platform. Oh, there you go. Look at that. Perfect timing. So if you could, these are the new sections of our 2026 platform, which we will cover. So you don't know exactly what each of them means, but you can take a guess at what what our policy recommendations might be under here. So if you could just take a second to answer which area within our platform is most aligned with your work and your priorities. We'd love to hear from you, and maybe we can spend a little more time on those sections when we get to them. So we'll give you a minute or two, just some quick answer which section of these categories is most aligned with the work that you're doing. And then do we see the results? I don't know if we see the results. We do see the results. I don't know if you all can see the results, but I can see the results. And we have leadership planning and governance at number 1, funding and investment at 0 votes. Wow. Okay. Physical infrastructure is in second place and social infrastructure is in third place. Okay. Very interesting. So we will make sure to go through those sections. We'll spend equal time on all sections, even though people made different indications of their priorities. Okay, great. So we can go through to the next slide and start the introduction to the policy platform and what is new in this year's policy platform. All right, so let's just jump right in to the kind of opening slide here. Yes, so it is always a pleasure to do these platforms, especially to hear from you all about what you're working on, what you're excited about, and how we can work together. And as many of you know, Waterfront Alliance's work spans across many different policy and program areas, from climate resilience, environmental and climate education, working waterfronts, emergency preparedness, building and design standards. And so this is actually just our third official policy platform. And so every year we're working to improve it and to get it right. And over the last 2 years, we actually got some really, really great feedback from our alliance partners, from government agencies and elected officials. And mostly what we heard is that our platform was way too long and too in the weeds, and that we should simplify the language and our positions and then go deeper into the advocacy together, but to really use this more as a policy priorities and kind of guide guardrails and guiding document for what we are working on and what our priorities are. So we heard you, and that feedback was really, really valuable. It actually forced our team to look across the many different program areas and to think about the broader categories of our work and the overlaps with them instead of just breaking them down by program. So because I know everybody here read the entirety of our 2024 and 2025 platforms in the past, I'm not going to do a full recap, but let me just quickly give you quickly refresh your memory of how it was broken out before. We had 6 categories with tons of subcategories, and those were climate change resilience and adaptation, waterfront permitting, estuary education, public waterfront access, maritime, working waterfronts, and waterborne transportation, and number 6 was renewable energy. And so those very much follow our internal programs, but that structure proved to not be as helpful to our external partners. So we have now designed the platform to be both a practical and inspiring, even though you might think of those two things as different, we see them that they can come together, a practical and inspiring roadmap for the public and the elected leaders who help shape decisions across our region. And instead of that kind of programmatic breakdown, we found these shared themes across all of our program work. And those themes, or what we're now calling action areas, are what you're seeing here on the slide. So we have 4 sections. The first is leadership, planning, and governance, and these were the ones from the poll. Number 2 is funding and investment. Number 3 is physical infrastructure, and number 4 is social infrastructure. So we will drop a link in the chat to our full platform and encourage you to follow along with us if you can, but we'll also share the link to the platform in a follow-up email to all registrants for those who can't join right now or maybe are joining over the phone or in transit. So let's jump to the next slide and get into our first action area, which is leadership, planning, and governance. So another thing you'll notice is that there's 2 bullets on this slide. And we did simplify the platform and we tried to slim down all the recommendations from before, but don't worry, we did not slim them down to just 2. Instead, if you see in the platform itself, we have a blue box with our top 2 priorities per section. And for the sake of this walkthrough right now, we'll just focus on those top 2, and then happy to go into the rest of what's in the platform in our discussion and moderated Q&A with Julie and with the audience. So what do we mean on this first action area about leadership, planning, and governance? Well, the way we're describing it here is that we want to support proactive leadership and collaboration. I think those are the 2 kind of key words, proactive and collaboration, across local, state, and federal governments to advance science-based and comprehensive planning, as well as transparent, coordinated, and effective governance for waterfronts and coastlines. Essentially, that means we are calling for our leaders to step up, to coordinate together, and to deliver meaningful actions on all the things that are happening along our waterfronts, from climate resilience, waterfront access, working waterfronts. And our top 2 priorities here are aimed at just that. The first one we were calling for is a more centralized oversight of waterfront planning and policy within the New York City Mayor's office. And this is a big one. There are a lot of opinions, I think, on what that should actually look like, and we'd love to hear from you all about that. But for now, what we're advocating for is a more organized structure under the deputy mayors. As it stands right now, there is just too much waterfront planning and policy that's not coordinated. And that's not to say that there's not interagency collaboration, which I do think is important and seems to be improving, but it's really about the longer term planning and coordination to make sure that we have people who are dedicated to setting a vision for what's happening across our waterfronts all over, from the economic development, from the maritime and working waterfronts, to the climate resiliency, to the recreation and access and parks. Who's really in charge of bringing all of that together and making sure that it's adding up to one kind of shared goal and vision? So that's the first one. And then the second priority here is related to the 5-borough climate adaptation plan, also for New York City. And if you've heard me talk about this before, I'm sorry, but you're going to hear it again. And if you haven't heard me talk about it before, I don't know how that's possible. So in 2021, we, Waterfront Alliance, and our partners in the Rise to Resilience Coalition had supported the New York City Council in passing a local law that would require the Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice to conduct a 5-borough climate adaptation plan. And that plan would require the city to do neighborhood by neighborhood engagement, to evaluate different kinds of climate and social risks, and build that towards a comprehensive plan for stormwater flooding, coastal flooding, extreme heat, and all the other climate risks across our city. And unfortunately, that plan did not come to fruition after that bill was passed in the prior administration, in the last mayoral administration. And so, we're really upset about that. And we worked with the council again. And now the adaptation plan is going to be folded into the city's kind of broader sustainability planning process, which you may be familiar with, called Plan YC. So we're expecting the city to be working on this 5-borough adaptation plan. And the reason we have it as such a high priority is, of course, because it's really important that we have that planning and we're setting up those criteria and expectations, but also because it's a new administration that's coming into the city, and we don't want this to get lost in the sauce of all the other things that are going on. This has to be a priority and really help us understand how we're going to make investments related to climate resilience and adaptation moving forward. Okay, so we can move into the second action area on the next slide, which is around funding and investment. I'm going to do my best to really excite this one up because nobody in the poll selected this one, but maybe it's because we haven't described exactly what we're talking about here. So this action area is related to funding and investment, right? I mean, it's in the name, and we're really talking about sustained, equitable, transparent, and maybe most importantly, dedicated funding streams. And this is actually connected to the one before, to planning in many ways, in the sense that I think we tend to plan and prescribe funding to areas that are just hit really bad from a disaster, or where there's a real opportunity or a project is being identified, instead of a proactive kind of systemic and dedicated funding program that could help to prevent maybe those disasters from wreaking the havoc that they do. And so our first priority here is really aimed at just generally increasing the climate budget for New York City. And I don't know if folks in the audience are aware, but the New York City Office of Management and Budget, or OMB, has actually started to track the city's climate budget and spending, which is great. And you can see this report that kind of breaks down how the city's expense budget is being allocated towards climate programs. And it is great, except for when you look at it and you see how little we're spending on stormwater and coastal flooding in particular. And so a huge thing that we've been trying to do is really educate not just the agencies in the mayor's office, but the city council, to make sure that they understand the funding that we need to advance a lot of the work that we're talking about here in this platform, and that many of you are familiar with and working on. And so, this photo here actually on the top is from just a few days ago. We were at the City Council Environmental Protection and Waterfronts Committee hearing, testifying in support of funding that we can talk about again as we get more in detail. And then the second priority here is about developing and pursuing self-sustaining funding strategies, innovative and self-sustaining funding strategies, which really gets to that dedicated part in the description for resilience infrastructure across the region. We have money sometimes for the planning, sometimes we rely on federal funding, sometimes the city has resources to pay for the planning, but it's when it gets into that capital and a time to build that we sometimes don't have the money. And what we keep hearing often from our community partners especially is that there's a lot of planning, but there's not a lot of delivering on the actual infrastructure that people spend a lot of time planning for and visioning for. And so we have all these programs that you may know about, like the Climate Strong Communities program that the Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice is leading, where we're working with community. Or, Waterfront Alliance has a couple of plans that we're working on in Flushing Meadows, Corona Park, and along the Coney Island Creek in Coney Island. And it would be great if the city had this kind of capital funding dedicated, or it could be also expense funding, but it's just some dedicated funding for climate resilience so that projects could move forward quicker instead of having to constantly fight this battle of identifying ways to get funded, which is where I think we're really stuck right now. Okay, so that's the second priority. I think we can move along into number 3 on the next slide, which is physical infrastructure. And so the next two categories, or the last two categories, are physical and social infrastructure. And before jumping into this, I just want to quickly talk about the difference between those two. And maybe some people are already really familiar, and others are not. And so just to kind of level set what we're talking about when we say physical and social infrastructure. I heard someone say or describe physical infrastructure as the bones and social infrastructure as the soul, which is maybe like a more philosophical or like meta way to think about it. But I've also heard people say that the difference between the systems is that one is about moving things and one is about connecting people, or thinking about the kind of tangible man-made structures like roads, bridges, tunnels, the grid or power grids, water mains, sewer systems. Like those are physical infrastructure. And then social infrastructure, maybe confusingly, can be physical in the sense that it can be a place, but it's more about shaping the way that people interact. So maybe think about libraries or schools, community centers, rec centers, parks, playgrounds. And so there's a lot of maybe overlap in them in our priorities, but we're trying to make a distinction here between the kind of physical infrastructure and the social infrastructure. So for now, I'll talk about the kind of physical infrastructure priorities that Waterfront Alliance is looking at. So the way that we have it described in the platform is focusing on nature-based and engineered physical infrastructure, including clean ports, renewable energy systems, living shorelines, things that protect people, ecosystems, and our built environment from the impacts of climate change, that reduce emissions, and that strengthen kind of our regional leadership in the blue and green clean energy transition. So some of the priorities here, you shouldn't be surprised to see them. These are really some of the strongholds of the Waterfront Alliance over the many years, is to break down some of those physical barriers to public waterfront access. This first image on the top of the slide is our staff out in the South Bronx with our partners at South Bronx Unite, doing a tour of some of the literal physical barriers, like a fence in this case, to public waterfront access. And it could be, what we're thinking about the ways that we can break down those barriers and allow people to connect with the spaces in a real way. And then the second priority here is about expanding marine freight and blue highways. So moving more goods by boat instead of by trucks. And we know that New York City is committed to a program there. And so we really just want to make sure that actually manifests and comes to life. All right. And then our last slide here before we jump into the Q&A is on social infrastructure. So what we're talking about here, beyond what I said just a moment ago, is to just support the expansion of equitable waterfront access to the waterfront, or climate education work, workforce opportunities, and all these things that empower our residents and our neighbors to connect with and to steward and to benefit from the resilient waterfronts and coastlines in their neighborhoods and that we're advocating for. And so you can see already kind of the overlap there between physical and social infrastructure when you talk about something like waterfront access. But just to keep going, our kind of top two priorities here are to improve our emergency preparedness communication in New York City. And the reason this is actually just for New York City is that our team has been looking at New Jersey and realizing that New Jersey actually has a pretty robust emergency preparedness communication system, and that New York City has a little bit of work to do to catch up. And we've been kind of caught off guard by storms in the past, whether they're hurricanes or these like unnamed rainfall events where we're seeing, unfortunately, people dying in their basements or being not being notified with enough time in advance to prepare for the storm. And so we really, really want to make sure that we're improving the communications, and that means reaching people, meeting people where they are, creating communications in multi languages, consolidating the communications, and really empowering the New York City Emergency Management Office, or NICEM, to be the lead on all of these things. And something that Waterfront Alliance really, really advocates for is that any infrastructure project that's happening in a neighborhood should have an emergency preparedness component to it, and that you should be talking to people about signing up for Notify NYC, knowing their evacuation routes, and like that should be embedded in everything that we do, so we're never ever caught off guard by a future storm or disaster. And then the second is around connectivity, which is a social infrastructure pillar, I guess. And so we're really looking at expanding and continuing to advocate for the expansion of the ferry service across the harbor region. And, you know, we have a photo here of NYC Ferry, but we're also, I think, thinking about other ways of moving around. We talked about blue highways in the last one. And so just thinking about moving people, connecting people, using the ferries as a way to get around, and really making that a part of our transit system, a part of our commuting system, which it has been growing. And so just really thinking about the things that we can do to establish it more and support expansion, particularly in transit deserts and communities that are organized and ready for ferry landings. And so we can talk about that a little bit more as we move forward. So I think that's the last slide that we have to go through, just the kind of overview. And so I think we can maybe stop sharing the screen now and just jump into a bit more questions about, like, in real time what we're working on. And I'll pass it off to Julie to help us guide that conversation.
Thank you, Tyler. That was fantastic. This question is for both of you. So as you just presented, our policy platform is large and expansive. What do you think are some of the most relevant things that are happening in the policy world right now? Like, what's particularly timely?
Yeah, that's a great question. Maite, do you want me to go first, or do you want to go first?
I can go first,
Yeah, go for it.
talking about the specific state bills that we're advocating for. On the legislative side, we're focusing our advocacy efforts around the Climate Resilience New York Act and the Rain Ready New York Act. So those are two separate bills. One corresponds to one of the pillars about planning and leadership, trying to centralize the government and planning into one office. So the bill establishes a statewide climate resilience plan and a chief resiliency officer. And this is modeled after other states. So it's not a new concept. More than 15 states have these types of offices, as close as New Jersey and as far as Florida. And it was introduced in Albany for the first time in 2024, and we've been advocating and building support for it. It passed the Senate unanimously, and now it sits in the Assembly Committee of Government Operations. So we're hoping to see it fully pass in the floor in the Assembly soon, especially given the importance of local and state leadership on climate, and specifically climate resilience now. And the other bill that we're focusing on is the Rain Ready New York Act. And what it talks about is legal clarification for the sewer and water authorities around the state. So in New York City, they currently lack this legal clarification to sort of innovate stormwater management programs. So this bill just simply adds a legal definition of stormwater in order to change that. So they're able to create or expand stormwater management programs, like, for example, incentive mechanisms for green infrastructure. If you put up a green roof in your property, and you create or sort of not contribute more to the stormwater runoff, just by creating more green spaces that absorb that water and make us be more prepared for flooding. So this bill was also introduced in the 2024 session. We've been trying to grow support for it. And as part of our advocacy efforts that we've done already. We've put together 2 advocacy days in Albany. So we're going in person there, talking directly to the legislators and their staff about these bills, why they're important, why does it matter, why stormwater specifically, or why this legal clarification. It can be some sort of confusing, but when you explain it, they sort of understand the need specifically for New York City. And we put together 2 successful advocacy days with more than 30 meetings with state senators and assembly members. We've also gathered memos of support from different offices, from all the borough presidents' offices except Staten Island. And the advocacy day resulted in 8 new co-sponsorships of the bill. So it was very successful. And most recently, we co-hosted this past Monday a flooding town hall in Bayside, Queens. It was specifically focused to raise support for the Rain Ready New York Act and just raise awareness overall about flooding and solutions. And we organized alongside with the Queensborough President's Office, the Bayside Bit, and other partner organizations like Riverkeeper, the Swim Coalition, Save the Sound, all of which are part of our Rise to Resilience Coalition. We also had presentations from MOCJ, the Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice there, and the Department of Environmental Protection, as well around flooding and infrastructure solutions. And we put together a panel with representatives from the business sector, city officials, advocates, and just experts in the field. And we had a great discussion about why and how flooding happens. We talked to residents directly on how to prepare better and where are the resources, the relevant contacts, what is the city doing to improve this, and how can we support the solutions. And we had over 70 Bayside residents attend this event. So it was quite a success. As part of our advocacy efforts, we also launch action alert campaigns. So those are virtual ways that we can also raise support for legislation where individuals can write letters and they're sent directly to their representative. So we launched a new action alert recently, specifically focused on the Rain Ready New York Act. Last year, we got more than 180 letters sent. So it's really a good way to raise support. And we're trying to boost support now for the Rain Ready specifically because of how timely and important it is and urgent. And also the city has a good argument for it, and they're hoping to have this bill passed. So we're working with them to get a memo of support, and that's one of our current efforts and conversations with them. But since it's a new administration, they're currently staffing and they're setting their new priorities before providing any memos of support. So we're sort of in this transition period, but also working with all city agencies to boost support in all directions at the same time. I'm going to pass it back to Tyler.
Yeah, no, that was great, Maite. Thank you. And yeah, the 180 letters was great. I'm just looking at the link in the chat, and we have 9 right now. So maybe if we can get, I mean, we just launched it, to be fair. So, but if we could get some of our members of the audience here to write to your local state senator or assembly member and boost those numbers in real time, I think that would be very awesome. But yes, Maite is covering a really, really important part of our advocacy, especially something that's really, really timely. And you mentioned our advocacy days, and we have our next advocacy day officially scheduled for May 6th. And so all of our Rise to Resilience Coalition partners and anybody really, I think, who wants to join is welcome. And we'll be advocating for the 2 bills that Maite's talking about and just general support for resilience legislation up in Albany. But yeah, maybe to answer also Julie's question about kind of things that are going on right now, I can talk a little bit about 2 things related to funding, and one that I touched on in the presentation around the city council. But just for people to know, we did testify on March 19th at the New York City City Council's Committee on Environmental Protection and Waterfronts budget hearing, and it was a really good and long hearing. I think maybe around 4 hours. But the city was there representing, DEP was there representing the city, to talk about kind of where they are and some of their priorities. And the council asked questions, and the public came in and testified. And so we testified alongside many of our partners about increasing funding for a couple of things. And maybe I'll just list up a few of them. The first, I would say, that's been an ongoing priority for us is to fully fund or bring the funding at least up from what it is now for the Bureau of Coastal Resilience, which in New York City, DEP is the new bureau that is in charge of all of the kind of coastal planning and also infrastructure moving forward. So if you know about the projects along the waterfront that have any kind of gates or swing gates or rolling gates or flip up gates, whether it's the Brooklyn Bridge Montgomery project, the East Side Coastal Resiliency Project, it is that bureau that's in charge to actually go out and open those and activate those in the event of a disaster, but also to do the kind of long-term planning for future projects. And so we're advocating for $15 million for that bureau to fund staffing levels and to also do some of the planning work and compound flood modeling that they need to do. Other things that we're advocating funding for are the completion of the Lower Manhattan, the design portions of the Lower Manhattan Coastal Resilience Project. There's one kind of section there in the Battery that is still not funded to go through design. And so we've been working to get the city to cover that and to move that project forward. We were talking with some folks at Manhattan Community Board 1 the other day too about their kind of concerns and ideas for the project. And so we just want to see that engagement and design continue to move forward, because in our eyes as a kind of citywide organization, until the city completes this big portfolio that it has in Lower Manhattan, it's not going to be able to really go out full swing to the outer boroughs and to the other neighborhoods that really need that same level of protection. And so we've been sitting on this Lower Manhattan unit for quite some time, and we really want to see the city move quickly to advance those projects forward so we can start working on resilience projects in all the other places that really, really need that level of protection and infrastructure. So I think Aria just put a link to our full testimony in the chat. There's a lot of other great stuff in there about the fiber adaptation plan, which we talked about. We advocate for funding for NISM's Strengthening Communities program for preparedness, unlocking public waterfront access projects, piloting some in the South Bronx. We're working with partners on the North Shore of Staten Island. So there's a lot kind of that's going on in this moment. And then maybe the last thing I'll say is around an effort that we were taking. This is unrelated to kind of the council budget now, moving into another issue that we had been working on for a few years now, and that was the federal government's attempt to cancel the FEMA BRIC program, or that's the Federal Emergency Management Agency's Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities, which is BRIC acronym program. And that is a nationwide resilience funding program. It's probably the strongest resilience funding program, and has allocated, I think, more than $5 billion across the nation, around $320 million here in New York State, with a heavy load of that being down here in New York City, for a lot of great projects, for some of our cloud-burst management projects, for NYCHA funding to upgrade some of the infrastructure and NYCHA housing to be resilient to flooding, for infrastructure improvements to the Hunts Point Food Distribution Center, where a lot of our food comes in for the region. And so they're like really great projects that you would question why they would be canceled. And so we took to the streets last year when that was announced, and held a rally and press conference down at City Hall to push for the city and the state to file a lawsuit and to get that money, fight for that money back. And we were really thrilled that Attorney General Tish James, the New York State Attorney General, did join, I think, 22 other states in a multi-state lawsuit against the BRIC cancellation. And we've now seen, as of, I want to say last week, a couple of rulings have come out, but I think as of last week, FEMA did respond to a federal judge's notice that they have to restore the program and restore the funding. And so all the funding that was paused and all the future applications will be put back out there. I think there's still a question of what that's going to look like. And if you're following the whole airport saga at TSA, the Department of Homeland Security, which FEMA is housed under, is currently not doing so great with funding, and they're in a bit of a temporary shutdown. And so it's a little unclear exactly how FEMA is going to respond. But we know that they are going to respond. That program is coming back, and that's a real opportunity for us to bring federal dollars into some of these climate programs. So I'll stop there, Julie. But that's just a couple of things that we've been working on in real time.
Thank you. That's super helpful. I think just zooming in maybe on New York City specifically, Tyler, especially given your role on the transition committee for the new mayor, what are you seeing in terms of kind of our key priorities for the first 100 days, which I think we just hit, and how is the mayor doing? How's the city doing on that
Yeah,
vis-a-vis the Waterfront Alliance?
yeah, that's a great question. I think we're in day 84
Ah,
maybe of the first 100 days. I don't know if that's right, but so we're getting close
business
to.
days or
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. And so we're getting, either way, I know we're getting close to 100. And so unfortunately, I don't know that a lot of our first 100 days priorities are have been super highly prioritized by the new administration. I mean, I think some of the things that they've been doing really well to hit the ground running is, we just hosted a webinar yesterday, a feedback session, I should say, yesterday with the Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice for the EJNYC report, and that's the city's first environmental justice report that they're launching. And so they are accepting feedback through April 1st, I believe. And so there's a link on their website where you can provide feedback, but they're doing a good job of trying to move that plan forward. I think in terms of some of our funding priorities that I talked about, we haven't seen a lot of that being prioritized quite yet by the administration. I think the Bureau of Coastal Resilience, I'm not clear whether or not they're committing to fully funding that office. I'm not sure what they're looking at for the kind of Five Eyes Seaport project for strengthening communities. And so again, I mean, I think a lot of this just speaks to the need of the Waterfront Alliance and our many alliance partners, because there's so much in the administration's priorities right now related to housing and economic justice. And I think sometimes it's hard to see that a lot of our work is related there, but it's not in the kind of everyday news and vernacular. And so we really, really do just need to continue to sound the alarm and ring the bell, however you want to say it, and really just put these things on their list. And so I'd say in the first 100 days, it's not looking like a lot has moving forward within the administration. But I do want to point to one win in the first 100 days. It's not from the new administration, but we should still allude to it or mention it. And that is that Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez did allocate some funding to the South Bronx for the Mott Haven Port Morris Waterfront Plan that our really great partners at South Bronx Unite have been leading for the 132nd Street Pier, and to get some funding, I think around a little over $1 million to help make that a more resilient and accessible pier. And so that is in our first 100 days, and whoever allocates the funding there will take it. And obviously there's more work that needs to be done, but yeah, those are just a couple of things that are going on within the first 100 days.
Well, these next 16 days better be really productive. As we're looking ahead, I guess if there's anything you haven't mentioned in terms of what priorities are on the horizon that you think really haven't gained momentum but should be on our partners' radar.
Yeah, I have some thoughts. I don't know, Maite, if you also had any thoughts, but I'm happy to start. Okay, so I'll just say quickly here, I think a couple things in our platform that we haven't touched on yet that are certainly a priority for us are the city has launched this kind of pilot voluntary buyout program called Resilient Acquisitions. And that's something that we've been advocating for a long time in both states. And New Jersey, again, to their credit, has a really great voluntary home buyout program called Blue Acres. And so we're hoping to see a similar program here in New York City and in New York State. I think New York State is launching their program called Blue Buffers, and New York City is called Resilient Acquisitions. But it's still a little bit TBD on how they're going to fund the program and how far it's going to reach and how big it's going to go. And so that is something that I think we'll continue to monitor over the next few months, especially in the city, because the state does have the Environmental Bond Act, which many people probably remember, does allocate funding to voluntary buyouts. And so I'd imagine the state is going to tap into their own Bond Act funding to kind of help boost up that program, but not clear what New York City is going to do and how they're going to fund the program. And we want to see the Bond Act money, some of that come to New York City to support, but that's something that I think we'll keep an eye on for sure. And then another thing that we haven't touched on a ton, but we mentioned in the slides, is around ferries. I think that's something that I'm really personally excited about. I think there's just so much opportunity, especially as both states are talking about transportation solutions. The ferries are really, really a great resource. And so not just expanding New York City ferry here, which we do support, of course, but also thinking about how to move more people by boat between New York and New Jersey. I think that's something that we maybe haven't, we have, of course, in some areas, but if we could grow that, I think that could be really, really exciting too. So yeah, those are just a couple things that I might point to. And I don't know, Maite, if you had anything that you maybe wanted to add.
I mean, you mentioned this, but I do want to plug in again the city budget and just engaging with the budget. You can still submit testimonies and you can attend public hearings and just advocate for all these programs to expand or to keep having dedicated funding for them. So they're not on the negotiation table when it comes to cutting down the budget. And as much as we engage in the budget every year, then every year we get a little bit of that percentage more. So I invite everyone to review the OMB report that Tyler mentioned earlier to see what is the real picture of climate funding in the city, and to keep engaging around the budget. I think it's not that exciting, the funding and investing in investments and budget management, but I think it's a pretty important topic, especially because we can't do anything else if it's not for funding.
Great. And I guess to end on a positive note, I guess in our dream world, if we're successful in getting our policy priorities right, what's one thing that each of you is most excited about?
Well, not to repeat myself, but definitely funding. But this year, I'm particularly excited about the Rain Ready bill and just the excitement about flooding solutions. It seems like the recent years we've been talking about the flooding problem as a problem and things that have been increasing rainfall, increasing storms. But now we're focusing the conversation on solutions. So I'm pretty excited about all the possibilities and the creative and innovative solutions that we can come up with around flooding.
Yeah, a plus one to that. And I think if I could be excited about one, I would go maybe to the first recommendation that we had in our first category of our platform, which is around the oversight challenge of the waterfronts. So I think that seems to be something that a lot of our alliance partners across the different kind of areas that we work in, from the maritime and working waterfront side to the climate resilient side to the waterfront access side, are really concerned about, in that there is not like this one-stop place where you go and you can understand what the city is doing and the region really more broadly is doing in all these respects. And so I think I'm excited about thinking about pushing for that oversight, and whether or not it happens in the way that we've kind of envisioned it under the deputy mayors. I know there's talks of creating new offices. And so I do think, that's something that I want to continue the conversation on and really try to fix, because Maite's talking about funding. And so I'll talk about kind of governance and planning and just making sure that we have the resources in place and the plans in place to make sure that we're getting to all these things that we all care about so much. And we're just really only as good as what we can plan for. And I don't want to keep having to do these like reacting to projects, but I think if I'm trying to be optimistic, I'd love to get to a place where we create this kind of roadmap together for what that looks like. And I know that's what we're working on here at Waterfront Alliance, and we'd obviously want to see that at the city level. I muted myself, but I think I'm good. Yeah, so that's what I'd say.
All right, thank you. I think as we wrap up, we'd like to launch one final poll from the audience, and we would like to hear from you about how you would like to get involved. You only get to pick one way, but we hope you'll get involved in multiple ways. The options are connect on policy, ideas, advocacy, build awareness, or programming. And I think we'll give it another 30 seconds, and then the powers that be can share the results. And I guess I will say we do have maybe 2 minutes left. If there are any questions from the audience, we'd be happy to throw some curveballs at Tyler and Maite and see what happens. feel free to pop any questions into the Q&A and the chat. All right. And with that, I want to thank you both so much. You are playing such a critical role at Waterfront Alliance, but also in the region. And I know you're doing a lot of the behind the scenes work to make these policies come to fruition. So really appreciate you taking the time today to walk us through this and really highlight the ways that all New Yorkers and those in New Jersey and across the region can get involved. One other way folks can get involved is our annual Waterfront Conference that's coming up real soon. I'm sure many of you have been before. This year it's going to be on May 19th, and the topic is future-proofing our waterfronts. So really excited, have a great lineup. We will drop the link in the chat for you to sign up to attend. And you can also sponsor if you are affiliated with a company. We have a Blue Tech Expo. It's going to be great, and will be taking place again down in Battery Park, which has had some exciting progress on the resilience front. So also have the option to tour some of our newer resilient infrastructure. So thank you again so much. Thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to engaging with you over the coming months and seeing you at our upcoming events. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.